working together. That we're all, there's a level of, you kind of balance it out, meaning you can all live with the results of this for the long term. That's where you want to get something that's sustainable long term. You don't want to do this. We don't want to see a war start again in 3 or 4 or 5 years. You just don't want to go there.
Thank you for that. So we're sitting here in Brussels, and obviously we've seen Europeans stepping up in many, many ways. They're not directly at the negotiating table, but they have been scaling up their support for Ukraine. As you know, France and the UK leading the so-called coalition of the willing. To what extent is the United States today ready first of all, how do you perceive the role of Europe and what it's been doing over these past months to support Ukraine and step up? And secondly, how do you see US role in supporting this coalition of the willing, and how could it translate concretely?
Yeah, I think what's important is unity of the alliance. Everybody staying together, working together. That's absolutely critical. I think what you don't want to do is, the term I would use as an American term, you don't want any stray voltage. You want to make sure that everybody's in lockstep going forward. And I think that's critical. And you're seeing, and we primarily work with what we call the E3, the Brits, the French, and the Germans as well. And the fact is, we recently had Prime Minister Starmer come to the United States. We've had President Macron come to the United States. And I think that's important, where the alliance stays really together. And I think that sends a very clear message to everybody. And I think it's important. It's important not only for European, the alliance itself, but I think it sends a clear message to President Putin that the alliance is not breakable. It's an unbreakable alliance. We're going to be around, a week from Tuesday. We're not going to go anywhere. And I think that's a critical message that needs to be sent. And it's just not to Russia, but to the entire globe as well. That it's an alliance that's been together for a long time, and it's going to stay together as well.
So we're just a couple of days away from the NATO Summit in The Hague, and Ukraine obviously is going to be an important piece of that. You just said it's important to show unity. It's important to show strength, especially during this meeting, for the reasons you just outlined. From a Trump administration perspective, and from your perspective, what would constitute a successful summit? What do you want to achieve? And then as we look forward beyond the summit, how do you see the future of U.S. involvement in European security affairs?
It's a great question. I think what you want to see is, one of the criticisms the United States had with the alliance, and you probably all picked up on that, was when we talked about the defense contributions. Raising that to 5% of GDP that's going to be very, very important. You go back to the Wales Declaration, when everybody agreed and all the world leaders signed it was going to be 2.5% of GDP, of which 20% of that was on modernization. And everybody kind of agreed to that. When we first came in 8 years ago, the first Trump administration, there was only like 3 nations that were reaching that GDP level. And I think that's be important to making sure that everybody it sends a very clear message that we're going to maintain military strength. And frankly, I mean, everybody in this room, I know that if I said, let me, by a show of hands, how many of you can recite to me Article 5 of the NATO Treaty? How much everybody in this room could raise your hand? I'll lay you money. But how many of you can raise your hand and say, I know what Article 3 says? I used Article 3, I call that the funding article, which means that each nation individually and collectively will provide for the individual in common defense of the alliance. And I think once that agreement is made, then everybody needs to step up for that. It sends a very clear message to everybody. And I know with President Trump, that was one of his concerns early on. If you're an alliance, you're all part of the alliance. And everybody pulls together on that. And so success would be coming out of here with a pretty well-defined what the defense contributions are going to be. But the second is, where does everybody want to be with Ukraine? What does this look like for NATO and the membership of NATO in working with Ukraine and working with, bringing Russia back into the state of stable nations? What's that going to look like? What's that going to be? And I'm not sure we're there yet.
Well, what I suggest is that we continue the conversation by broadening the panel and welcoming our other panelists to the stage. Thank you, General, for sharing your thoughts. Stay with us so we can continue the conversation. Yeah. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Ils sont déjà devant.